Ukraine just gave Russia a major taste of its own medicine. It launched a colossal drone attack on numerous sites across the country, including the capital Moscow, with several locations left burning after Russian air defenses failed to fend off the swarms. The attack occurred overnight on September 12 and was reported by Russian officials and media agencies, who claimed that several hundred Ukrainian drones crossed the border. Russian Defense Ministry reports also say that 221 of Ukraine's drones were intercepted, yet some seemingly managed to bypass the Kremlin's failing air defenses and strike their targets, leaving damage and chaos in their wake. The main targets of Ukraine's drone strike appear to have been focused in the Smolensk, Leningrad and Moscow regions of Russia. In Smolensk, situated in western Russia, beside the border with Belarus, fires broke out at the Lukoil facility. The region's governor, Vasily Anokin, reported that air defenses in the area had activated to repel the drones, but gave no further details. Meanwhile, local residents captured the drama on camera, with video footage showing gigantic clouds of smoke rising above the region, fires on the horizon, and sounds of explosions in the air. From the footage, it appears that at least some of Ukraine's drones most definitely struck their targets, despite the best efforts of Russia's defense systems. The fact that Governor Anokin failed to mention the Lukoil facility or any fires or explosions is yet another example of Russian officials covering up the extent of Ukraine's attacks on their soil, likely to avoid spreading fear and panic among the population. But the footage doesn't lie, and residents can even be heard crying out and screaming in the background as the fires rage. Further north, other attacks occurred in the Leningrad region, which borders the Baltic state of Estonia and the Nordic nation of Finland, and lies close to the major Russian city of St. Petersburg. Ukrainian drones targeted the Primorsk Port, which is the biggest Russian oil loading port on the Baltic Sea. At least one fire broke out here on a vessel that was docked at the port, which was even confirmed by the region's governor, Alexander Drazdenko. Drazdenko also claimed that around 30 drones were taken out across the region, with debris crash landing in several sites, including the town of Tosno, situated some 30 miles southeast of St. Petersburg, and other little villages like Uzmino and Pokrovskaya. The governor reported no damage or casualties, though Russia's official reports often gloss over the less palatable details in order to make themselves look better. In addition, air defenses reportedly had to be activated in at least one region of St. Petersburg, and the city's international airport, Pulkovo Airport, which is the second busiest in all of Russia, had to be temporarily shut, with multiple flights disrupted or even cancelled because of the halt in operations. This is an increasingly common occurrence of late. Back on July 6, for example, a whole swathe of Russian airports had to shut down and call off flights due to safety concerns in the wake of multiple Ukrainian drone strikes across the country. The Russian Federal Aviation Agency reported that close to 300 flights were grounded in total over the course of a single evening at the Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow, Pulkovo Airport in St. Petersburg, and Strigino Airport in Nizhny Novgorod, one of Russia's biggest cities. Multiple airports also had to close the night before because of yet another attack, which shows just how Ukraine's drone warfare strategy has served to disrupt civilian life and air travel across the nation. This in turn allows Ukraine to effectively bring the war home for Russia and show the Russian people what's really happening, without resorting to the same sorts of illegal and inhumane tactics that Russia does when it throws bombs and drones at civilian targets like residential buildings, schools and so on. In total, an estimated 50 flights were disrupted or cancelled at Pulkovo because of the September 12 attack. In addition to that, residents in the area continued to report explosions and have called it one of the largest attacks seen in their region, as reported by independent news channel Astra on Telegram. In a post that was accompanied by a video in which numerous loud bangs can be heard in the background, Astra wrote, "Residents of the Leningrad region and St. Petersburg continue to hear explosions and report one of the most massive attacks on the region since the start of the full-scale war." Perhaps the most worrying part of this incident, as far as Russian President Vladimir Putin is concerned, is that Ukrainian drones were also seen soaring in the skies of Moscow itself. Sergei Sobyanin, the mayor of the Russian capital city, claimed at least 9 drones were shot down in the area. He also stated that emergency crews were heading to the sites where drone wreckage had fallen, but gave no further details. He didn't say if the city had suffered any damage or provided any information about where exactly the drones were taken out. Again, this all ties into the usual Russian tactic of secrecy and careful dissemination of information. Especially when Russia has bad news to break, the people in charge tend to be very cautious about what info they actually reveal, keeping some of the facts back or covering up the more negative elements. But in a world in which the internet and social media exist, those kinds of tactics don't always work. While Sobyanin was being secretive, numerous Russian Telegram channels reported residents' accounts of what was happening in and around the capital. There were several reports of explosions ringing out in the Mazhraïsk and Zyedovsk communities in the Moscow region, only a short distance west of the capital. This again suggests that not all of Ukraine's drones were shot down, despite Russian Defense Ministry claims that 85 drones were taken out in the Bryansk region, 42 more in Smolensk, 28 in Leningrad, 18 in Kaluga, 14 in Novgorod, and 9 more in the Moscow and Oryol regions. The ministry also stated that additional drones were taken out in other areas like Belgorod, Tula and Kursk, which would suggest that this was one of the most widespread Ukrainian drone attacks in recent memory, targeting over a dozen different regions in total. That's exactly the sort of attack that Ukraine and its people have to suffer on a nearly nightly basis. Very regularly, Russia launches vast swarms of drones over the borders to a wide range of towns, cities, settlements and regions in all 4 corners of Ukraine. The people have no idea where the next drones and missiles will hit, and the country's air defense systems are constantly on alert, ready and waiting to intercept as many enemy drones as possible to limit the amount of damage and the number of casualties. But in pulling off attacks like this, Ukraine is well and truly giving Russia a taste of what it has to go through all the time. And the fact that so many explosions were heard and numerous fires broke out proves that Russia doesn't seem at all ready to handle that. This is in spite of the fact that the Kremlin constantly boasts about its military capabilities and has one of the largest and most powerful armed forces in the world, spending massive amounts of money each year on new tanks, armored vehicles, and more recently drone production. It also claims to have some of the world's most sophisticated radar technology to detect enemy threats and leading air defense systems like the S-400 and S-500 to take out incoming drones and missiles. None of that seems to have sufficed here, however, as Russia's cities, towns and ports were at the mercy of Ukrainian drones, and even its capital, normally such an impenetrable stronghold, far from the horrors of the front lines, finally felt the effects of the war. It's not the first time that Ukraine's forces have targeted the Moscow region, but previous attacks have seen limited success. Russia, meanwhile, has been bombarding the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv since the early stages of the war. Only days before this attack, Russia set a new record, firing an unprecedented number of drones and missiles, more than 800 of them in total, at Kyiv and other towns and cities around Ukraine, killing at least 4 people and wounding more than 40 others. In Kyiv, a new mother and her infant child were among the victims, with 20 other people injured, according to local official reports. Numerous residential buildings were hit in the attack, with fires breaking out and multiple rounds of explosions ringing around the city as the hours went by. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attacks, saying, "Such killings, especially now when genuine diplomacy could have started long ago, are deliberate crimes that only prolong the war. Washington has repeatedly warned that sanctions will follow if talks are refused. We must fully implement all agreements made in Paris." Zelensky also spoke about how Ukraine is responding proactively to the attack by strengthening its defenses so it can intercept even more drones and missiles next time around. "We have coordinated our diplomatic efforts, follow-up actions, and contacts with partners to ensure an appropriate response. Together with France, we are preparing new measures to strengthen our defenses." Russia, meanwhile, may have been a little too focused on offense and not enough on defense. For months now, it's repeatedly and consistently intensified its attacks on Ukraine in various ways. It's expanded its drone and missile strikes, sending more and more weapons in Kyiv's direction to deal as much damage as possible. It regularly launches several hundred drones in each attack. Along the front lines too, Russia has deployed countless small squads of soldiers to assault towns, villages and cities like Pokrovsk, all in a bid to claim more territory as quickly as it can, though actual progress on the ground has remained relatively slow in many areas. Russia has even recently struck beyond Ukraine into Poland, with a small swarm of its drones passing the border and violating Polish and NATO airspace in the process, forcing Poland's air force to respond and down the drones by force for the very first time since the invasion began. Reports have since emerged to suggest that the drones were on their way to Pulkovo Airport, which is a key logistics hub in terms of delivering aid to Ukraine from its European allies. Some drones were also seen in Lithuanian airspace, and while the Kremlin has denied responsibility and even suggested its drones cannot possibly have travelled that far, numerous experts and world leaders evidently disagree. A senior NATO official, for example, told the German newspaper Welt, "Based on the available information, we believe the drones most likely entered NATO airspace deliberately." German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius agreed, stating, "They did not need to fly this way to reach Ukraine. There is no evidence that these drones accidentally flew over Polish territory in such large numbers on this route." Zelensky too was in no doubt that the attack was an intentional provocation on Moscow's part and set a dangerous precedent for Europe. Moscow always pushes the boundaries of what's possible, and if it does not encounter a strong reaction, it remains at the new level of escalation. Today was another step of escalation. Russian-Iranian Shaheeds operated in the airspace of Poland in NATO airspace. It was not just one Shahed that could be called an accident, but at least 8 strike drones aimed toward Poland. An extremely dangerous precedent for Europe. Whether there will be further steps depends entirely on the coordination and strength of the response. The Russians must feel the consequences. Russia must feel that the war cannot be expanded and will have to be ended. While the recent record attack on Ukraine and drone incursion into Poland are big sources of concern, there may be a silver lining here, which is that Russia has been so focused on firing drones and missiles wherever it can, it seemingly wasn't really ready to defend against a similar strike on its own territory. The country has poured so much of its money and decreasing resources into making more drones and carrying out offensive maneuvers, but doesn't appear to have done enough to protect itself. Ukraine appeared to sense this, spotting an opening in the Kremlin's lines and taking full advantage in its massive drone attack. And while the full extent of the damage done isn't yet known, it's more than likely that Russia will now have numerous buildings and other assets to repair and rebuild once the fires are finally extinguished. Looking back at Ukraine's moves and tactics in recent months, this drone attack may have in fact been quite a long time in the making. Over the last year, Kyiv on numerous occasions has targeted and taken out not just Russian logistic targets like oil refineries and ammunition storage facilities, but important defense systems and radars too. There are countless examples of this. Back in June of last year, for example, Ukraine made headlines when it used US-supplied HIMARS launchers and GMLRS missiles to take out one of Russia's S-400 air defense systems in the Belgorod region. 2 launchers and a command center were said to be destroyed in the strike, dealing a major blow to Russia's aerial defenses in the blink of an eye. Only a couple of months later, in August 2024, Ukraine struck again. It launched a coordinated strike on targets in Crimea, sinking a Russian submarine and damaging no fewer than 4 S-400 anti-aircraft missile launchers, effectively opening a pathway through the skies for drones and missiles to travel through. The same happened again and again elsewhere. In Crimea, in Kursk, in Belgorod and in other regions, Ukraine identified the key elements of Russia's defensive lines, the radars that Russia uses to detect incoming drones, and the defense systems it uses to fire and bring them down. And it took them out, one by one, using its own drones to remarkable effect and leaving Putin and his commanders with billions of dollars worth of broken or utterly destroyed equipment. These attacks are still going on to this day. Just recently, on September 9, Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, GUR, pulled off another successful strike on a pair of radar stations that were part of a bigger air defense complex in Crimea. To be more precise, a 48Y A6K1 podlet low-altitude radar and an RLM-M module, both part of a Nebo-M air defense complex, were destroyed by Ukrainian drones. Barely a week before that, another radar, this time part of an S-300 air defense system, was wiped out. Each attack is like a knife right in Russia's eyes, because with fewer radars and related systems, it has less and less hope of being able to detect and destroy Ukraine's drones and missiles as they pass over its territories. And this just goes to show the distinct difference in strategy between the two sides. Russian attacks tend to focus on intensity above all else. The Kremlin constantly ups the ante, sending more and more drones and missiles into Ukraine, but not really seeming to care too much where exactly they land. Many are taken out by Kyiv's ever-improving air defense systems, some of which it has developed domestically, while others have been provided by Ukraine's many allies across the globe. Some end up hitting their targets and tragically lead to casualties and loss of life among the civilian population. But more often than not, they hit targets that have very little military value, like residential homes or office buildings. While this can still lead to tragic losses for Ukraine to mourn, it doesn't necessarily weaken Ukraine's armed forces or make it harder for the country to defend itself or launch its own attacks. Kyiv, meanwhile, is much more strategic in its strikes. It identifies the targets that will hurt Russia most, not civilian buildings, not schools, not random farmers' fields or mostly abandoned settlements, but million-dollar radar systems, air defense missile launchers, and similar sites. It finds them, it figures out the best way to strike them, and it takes them out with increasingly ruthless efficiency. That in turn makes Russia weaker. It opens gaps up and down the front lines and even deeper into Russian territory. So the next time Ukraine fires drones and missiles into those directions, Russia has a far harder time bringing them down. That's how attacks like this strike on Leningrad, Moscow and Smolensk and other areas happen. It's the result of planning, hard work, intelligence and above all else, strategy, which is an area that Ukraine appears to be increasingly masterful in. And with more and more of Russia's defensive systems being taken out in recent times, and the Kremlin still seemingly concentrating more on offense than defense, an increasing number of gaps are likely to emerge in the weeks to come, paving the way for further strikes and increasingly dangerous bombardments of Russia's other high-value locations, like ports, airfields, factories, and so on. In other words, it feels like Ukraine is steadily building up to something, honing its strategy and using the resources at its disposal to turn the tide of the war in its favor. The fact that it recently unveiled a range of domestically produced and remarkably powerful new missiles like the Long Neptune, Sapsan and Flamingo should make the situation even more concerning for Putin and his forces. Because if Russia can't even defend itself properly against a couple of hundred simple drones, it will have little chance when the long-range cruise missiles and ballistic strikes start raining down upon it. Now, learn even more about Ukraine's latest major successes in our videos detailing how Kyiv's forces successfully took out one of Russia's rarest and most valuable ships in the Black Sea, and how some Ukrainian units have humiliated Putin by turning his own tanks against him. And finally, make sure to subscribe to our channel too, so you can be among the first to find out about the latest big news and developments from the front lines of Ukraine just as soon as they occur.